So as we continue to spotlight serotonin and how it plays such a major role in our health, mental, physical, pain modulation, and beyond, we want to be aware of some of the pitfalls that we can fall into, and having a better understanding of the physiology and metabolism of tryptophan getting to serotonin, along with how it interacts with other systems in the body, can help us, empower us to be aware of these potential pitfalls, know better, do better, and say, not going down that road, not going to fall victim to it. This is a key one because I think a lot of people fall into this trap right now of self-medicating, perhaps overeating, mood-motivated medicinal refeeding, if you will, especially in the variety of carbs and sugar, which we know can perpetuate other health defects, where it might, which we're about to show you, where it might boost the mood, albeit temporarily. Long term, we don't want to do that because this overconsumption of carbs, overconsumption of the sugars can lead us down that whole path to chronic disease and destruction through things like metabolic syndrome, obesity, prediabetes, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, energy spikes and dips, fatigue, brain fog, and the whole nine. So we want to be aware of this. One way to better be aware of this, empower ourselves, know what's going on, and say, okay, I got this, I'm going to hedge my bet against this, is again to understand the physiology. What we've talked about so far is tryptophan, and effectively getting tryptophan to serotonin, avoiding that tryptophan steal. That's something we've been spotlighting. Tryptophan in the body, once it's inside, and again, you want to make sure, number one, you're getting it from the dietary sources. You're getting dietary sources that are rich in tryptophan, that are rich in some of the cofactors that will get tryptophan to serotonin. We've talked about this. You can double back on that. We also want to make sure the digestive tract is even intact enough to absorb, digest, assimilate those nutrients to get them in and get them flowing. Those are foundational, and that's why we always go back to that. Those need to be in place before we go into more of these other aspects, these fine-tunings, these nuances of the whole system, if you will. We want to make sure those are in place first. Tryptophan, as we have here, tryptophan, once it's in the body, it needs to actively be transported across the blood-brain barrier. Our brain, just like our gut, there's a barrier system right there. It's there for our protection, keeping things we don't want in and selectively allowing things in. Tryptophan is no exception. Tryptophan is actively transported across that blood-brain barrier. Once inside, it forms serotonin. Once we get that serotonin, we get all those benefits, that calming effect, that happy effect. Now, it's not just tryptophan. Tryptophan goes across the blood-brain barrier with other amino acids. Remember, tryptophan is amino acid. So there's other ones. We put verse right here because it actually competes with these other amino acids for this transport mechanism. It's like there's a limited numbers of shuttles going across, and they're all lined up, ready to go, looking to get across. Some of the other amino acids that it competes with are things like phenylalanine, leucine, methionine, things like that. So we can see if we are just normally intaking our fuel, we have the amino acids presence. There's a little bit of checks and balance in place with this transport system, and the competition keeps things even keel. We get a little bit of this, a little bit of that, keeps things even keel. What can happen though, and this is our bodies can almost sense this, either consciously or subconsciously, is a phenomenon when we start to carb load or carb overload or too much sugar, because what happens at that point is when we eat these carbs, insulin goes up. And now the insulin goes up to transport glucose into the cell. We all know this. We've talked about this before. It doesn't just take glucose in by itself, though. It also transports these other free is a key word, amino acids into the cells as well. Here's the key part of this. Free amino acids. Free means unbound, meaning they can be grabbed by insulin and transported into different cells. Not the brain. We're talking about the other cells in the body that need the energy source. The phenylalanine, the leucine, the methionine that we just talked about competes with tryptophan for going across that blood-brain barrier. Now, the insulin's up. We've carb loaded. We really carb loaded. We really went to town on that sugar, gave into that sweet tooth. Insulin's up high. It's going to grab these other free amino acids, transport them into the cell. Now listen to this. Once those are gone, remember they compete with tryptophan to get into the brain. Once those are gone, due to our carb, perhaps overeating and insulin spike, there's less competition to get that tryptophan into the brain. If there's less competition to get that tryptophan into the brain, there's more going across. It's not as balanced now. There's more going across. More tryptophan into the brain equals more serotonin in the brain equals a carb-driven, sugar-driven, overeating, refeeding mood manifestation of the wellness and a feel-good attitude, but it doesn't come without its consequence. Like we say, the overfeeding of the carbs, the insulin resistance, the spikes in blood sugar, we talked about that, detriment to the health. This can then perpetuate that behavior, especially if we have a serotonin deficit, especially if we are not aware of and doing all we can to mitigate that tryptophan steal that puts us at a deficit, feeling depressed, anger, rage, paranoid, insomnia, pain levels up, constipation. If we're getting that already, we might then be more prone to this carb refeed and this sugar load to hedge our bet and sneakily get more tryptophan in there and feel better. So we want to be aware of this. It gives us another opportunity to look inside, look at our behaviors, and be aware of the potential pitfalls of this. Once we know better, we can do better. This is a fascinating mechanism right there. If you feel like you're one of those people who ends up refeeding and you don't know how to get off that roller coaster, be aware that this can be something at play. Be aware that you can clue in on that tryptophan steal and other ways to boost your serotonin levels, which we will go into as well. And you can hopefully then start to mitigate this. But awareness is number one. Awareness and say, okay, I know this is potentially what's going on right now. I'm going to halt it right here. Go a different avenue. So good luck. Fascinating stuff. Love it.